Welcome to the 7th episode of the Reading and Writing Podcast. I'm your host, Jeff Rutherford, and today we have an interview with Warren St. John, author of the new book, Outcasts United. Today on the Reading and Writing Podcast, I'm happy to be joined by Warren St. John, a New York Times reporter and the author of Rammer Jammer Yellowhammer, a look at the passionate and fanatical University of Alabama football fans. St. John's newest book, Outcasts United, which has just been published by Spiegel and Grau, tells the true story of the Fugees, a youth soccer team in Clarkston, Georgia, made up of refugees from a variety of foreign countries who have been relocated or settled in the Atlanta, Georgia area. Warren, welcome to the Reading and Writing Podcast.
Thank you for having me on. I really appreciate it.
Sure. Well, I just described your new book, Outcasts United, in a very brief sentence. I wondered if you could take a few minutes and give a little more background and info about the book and the story for someone who may not have heard about it before.
Sure. Outcasts United is the story of a refugee soccer team located in Clarkston, Georgia, just outside of Atlanta. And it's also the story of this town that has undergone a social change in a very short span of time. And it's the story of the coach of the team, Luma Mufla, who came to the U.S. from Jordan. And in some ways, I think one of the ironies of the story and of the Fugees and of Clarkston is that it takes this woman from Jordan and these kids from over a dozen war-torn countries to remind a community of what this country is all about and what our values are.
Sure. That sounds like a great description, and I definitely recommend the book if someone's listening to this. I've read it, and that's why I was interested in doing this interview. In the book, you write about the often horrific and brutal backgrounds of many of the refugee kids on the soccer team, and many of them are from African countries. I wondered, before you started working on this book, did you know much about Africa and the often violent conflicts going on in the countries that these refugees had to flee?
I think I knew about them in the way that, a news-obsessed American or European might know about them. And I'd read, books about African politics and history, like King Leopold's Ghost. I had a lay familiarity with them, but I took the occasion. I reported to read a lot more and try to understand a lot more because, as I say in the introduction of the book, that in some ways soccer provides a useful metaphor for understanding how this community in Georgia came to be. And by that I mean that because soccer is a fluid game, if you want to understand how something happened, you have to work back through the action to the first touch. And as I say in the introduction, if a goal is scored by a refugee from Burundi off of an assist from a refugee from Kosovo who got the ball from off a tackle from a refugee from Congo on a particular day at a particular time in Georgia, USA, to understand how those particular individuals came together at that very moment, you really have to work back past the first touch of the game to the political realities that caused them to have to flee their homelands in the first place, and to the mechanism of refugee resettlement to understand how they all ended up together in this community and ended up on the same team. So I try to offer that in the book because I think it's really important to honor the individual dignity of the kids and the characters in the story.
Sure.
Sometimes reporting about refugees can seem very distant and impersonal, and a lot of statistics are used that sort of deprive individual refugees of their, uniqueness. So I wanted to try to work around that problem by making sure that the kids came across as people and individuals.
Gotcha. Gotcha. Well, as someone who grew up in Middle Georgia, I could certainly recognize the people in Clarkston, Georgia, in the book, as more and more refugees were being relocated to their town. And in the book, you gave several examples of people who basically realized the inevitable and embraced the changing demographics of the town. For example, you write about a local grocery store owner who revamped his store to sell ethnic food. And I'm curious if you think that more people in Clarkston and other areas in Georgia that are being impacted by kind of the changing demographics, not only of Atlanta, but, if you look at the demographics of the United States as a whole, if you think that more people are embracing those changing demographics or resisting.
Well, that's an interesting question. I just think that the rate of change these days is accelerating so much that that I'm not sure people are resisting anymore or embracing anymore. I just think more people are having to deal with the impact of newcomers from distant cultures than in the past. I think in the past in our country, a lot of immigration was confined to larger metropolitan areas, particularly near coasts, and what you're seeing now is because of the ease of travel, people from all around the world are being sprinkled throughout the United States, and so little communities like Clarkston, Georgia, where no one there ever really encountered immigrants or refugees in any kind of large numbers for the first 110 years of this town's existence, suddenly find themselves playing host to people from not just one or two foreign countries, but dozens. And Clarkston, of course, is an extreme case, and that's what's so interesting about it. Is through this extreme case, you get to glimpse problems and issues that will be happening more pervasively over a wider area. And so I think Clarkston is a sort of laboratory for understanding that process, and that's what's fascinated me so much as a reporter.
Sure. And I'm just curious, the refugee organizations that you mentioned in the book, are they still settling refugees in Clarkston at the rate that you talked about in the book as of, say today?
In fact, I had a email exchange with the head of the International Rescue Committee office in Atlanta just last week, and she said that they had never been busier. They're resettling currently refugees from Burma, from Burundi, and from Iraq in and around Clarkston. So Clarkston it's really just a little town in 1 square mile, and people in the area refer to Clarkston, refer to the broader areas and neighborhoods around that 1 square mile as Clarkston as well. So the refugees going into Clarkston proper and going into the sort of greater Clarkston, if I can use that phrase, and then just around DeKalb County and around Atlanta. So it's accelerating.
Gotcha. I wondered, looking ahead, say even 5, 10, 15 years, at the kids that you wrote about in Outcast United, I wonder, do you think that they'll be fully assimilated into American culture? I wonder where you think that, that's headed.
Well, it's really tough to say, and I think the book is about kids who are sort of on the cusp of, two very different outcomes potentially. If they are able to get the education that they need, and some of the kids are able to do that, then really they can have incredibly successful lives. And I talked to and interviewed several or many refugees, in fact, who own businesses or who are doing well in Atlanta. The young woman who suggested to the owner of the grocery store you mentioned earlier that he carry Southeast Asian food for her community is now a senior VP at a large real estate company in Atlanta, and that's not atypical. But there are also a lot of stories of kids who don't get the education that they need, who aren't able to make up for the lost time in societies where education systems had broken down, or who weren't able to overcome the interrupted educational stints that they received in refugee camps. And they can get in a lot of trouble. There are a lot of bad options available to impoverished kids in some of these communities, and refugees are every bit as susceptible, if not more so, because of their vulnerability than other impoverished Americans. So some of the kids don't make it. Some of the kids get in trouble. Some of the kids father kids out of wedlock and join gangs, and things don't turn out well for them.
Stay tuned, and we'll have more of our interview right after this. The Kindle Chronicles is a Friday audio podcast all about the Amazon Kindle e-reader. I'm Len Edgerly, and each week I present Kindle news, tech tips, an interview, a quote, and listener comments. I've been a writer all my life, and I'm doing this podcast because the Kindle has simply renewed my love of reading. I hope you'll stop by for a listen. You can find me at thekindlechronicles.com or by searching for Kindle in the podcast area of the iTunes Store. I have a question for you that many sports marketers have pondered. With suburban soccer leagues becoming more and more prevalent in the U.S., I'm curious if you've ever thought about why Major League Soccer in the U.S. has struggled for so long to develop a thriving business and audience. As you mentioned in the book, in other countries, soccer is the sport, but even with the number of sports leagues in the U.S., America still has resisted it as a spectator sport. And I wondered if you had ever thought about why that is.
Well, I have, and I've read. There's a book about it called "Soccer and American Exceptionalism," which I've read, and I've read a lot of theories, and I think there are people who have pondered this question and written about it in far greater detail and with far greater zeal and deeper research than I have. But I think one of the major problems is that while it's true that a lot of kids in America play soccer, there's a drop-off point, and kids, I think, in America tend to play soccer in the organized setting,
right?
And if they don't have the organized structure of soccer, they tend to stop playing it. And that's not so true of basketball or maybe some other sports that people play. If you play hoops, if you're not playing on an official high school team or something, well, you still might have a 3 times a week game with your buddies, or you might show up at the pickup game each evening at the local gym or park. And a lot of immigrant communities, in fact, do have soccer leagues for adults or college-age students or teens that are much more recreational. They're all about fun.
Right.
And it's not that they don't take the game seriously, and they're certainly very competitive games, but Americans don't play it that way. We seem to need the structure of a league and a formal setting. And I think the problem there is the formal setting sort of evaporates after high school age for most kids if you don't play collegiate soccer.
Right.
So kids sort of move on at a pretty young age, 17, 18 years old. And it's another 10 to 13 or 14 years before they can really become the kind of paying spectator sport customers who can support a soccer league or a professional sports league.
Sure.
And in that interim, they drop off and they lose interest in the sport.
Yeah, gotcha. I think you're probably right about that. I was curious, after following the fanatical University of Alabama football fans for your first book, what was it that appealed to you about Luma Muffla and the coach of the Fugees with her own immigrant experience, and what was it about that story that kind of captured your attention?
Well, I dropped in on a game. I'd gotten a tip from a reader that the team existed, and I went to this game, and just I wasn't expecting to see much. I thought maybe I could someday get an article out of it. I just wasn't sure. But I saw this very intense afternoon unfold in front of me, where Luma was a quiet, very focused presence, and these kids from over a dozen countries seemed to really respond to her and want to please her and play well for her. And I was intrigued about what was going on in that transaction. Why did the kids want to please her? Why did they want to play so well? How are they connecting with each other over these cultural barriers and language barriers? And how did it come to be that a woman from Amman, Jordan, of all places, was coaching a refugee soccer team in the Deep South? These were interesting questions to me. And as a reporter, you're always drawn to points of transition, to scenes in society, scenes in culture where that's where things happen, sort of on the edges. And when it seemed to me, if you had a woman coaching mostly in a male league, a woman from Jordan in the Deep South, a soccer team with no advantages at all, playing the best equipped and best funded teams in the state, that there were a lot of themes there colliding together, and so I wanted to see what that was like, and now I wasn't disappointed. I mean, it was I learned so much from my reporting.
Great. Have you started thinking about your next book yet? Do you know what you'll be writing?
My next book, you said?
Yes, your next book.
I'm thinking about it all the time, but I haven't started writing. I'm following a couple of stories that may pan out to support a book. Books are complicated. They need a lot has to be going on, and so I've learned to just be a bit patient and for committing to make sure that I'm to make sure that the material is right for the forum.
Sure. Well, I have a final question. How do you think the Crimson Tide will do in college football this year?
It's interesting. I'm embarrassed to say I'm fairly removed from any of the latest college football news. I was planning to re-engage a bit later in the summer, closer to fall. So any prediction I could possibly make would be just a guess. But as a fan, of course, I'm an eternal optimist. So I expect it'll be pretty good, and I'll enter the season with all of the irrational optimism that a fan requires at the beginning of a season.
Sure. Okay, well, I think that's all I have for now. Thanks again for doing this interview, and if anyone's listening and would like to check out the book, the title of the book is Outcast United, and the author is Warren St. John. Thanks for listening to the Reading and Writing Podcast. If you liked what you heard, you can subscribe to our feed in iTunes, or you could leave a review of this podcast on iTunes. And if you'd like to leave a voicemail, we can include your audio comment in a future episode of the podcast. The voicemail line is 206-888-2731. Again, that's 206-888-2731. Thanks again for listening, and we will be back in 2 weeks with another interview with a writer that you enjoy reading.
Find everything okay?
Whenever you shop Meijer, you don't just shop for yourself. You shop for your entire community. You help keep your neighbors well with vaccine clinics and select free prescriptions. You help provide specialized care and comfort through healthcare programs across the Midwest. Whenever you shop Meijer, you help support a wide variety of programs that keep our communities healthy and thriving.
Thanks for shopping with us.
Learn more at Meijer.com.
There are so many reasons not to skip breakfast. So many savory, mouth-watering, tasty, delicious beyond all belief reasons. Actually, that last one was pretty convincing. Stop by for a McDonald's breakfast. Mix and match a sausage biscuit, sausage McMuffin, sausage burrito, or hash browns, any two for just $2. Price and participation may vary, cannot be combined with combo meal.